Welcome back to Head to Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Markham. I have some pretty big news. I'm just going to jump out and say it. We're not going to waste any time here in this episode because I only have, I think, 5 more episodes to share with you until I fully retire from hosting this podcast. It's been a long journey. The first episode of Head to Heart came out in 2019. So that's 5 years ago. But then I've been doing this podcast consistently for the last 3 years. And so I only have a few more episodes to share with you, my dear listener. And with that in mind, retirement is coming up. I'm only 25. I'm retiring. I got to throw a retirement party for myself. But, I was just thinking, okay, if I only have 5 more episodes to share with the audience of Head to Heart, what on earth do I want to say to them? Because those episodes, the last ones, they seem to hold more weight than other ones that were like 2 years in, 3 years in, with no end in sight. So maybe some of you, this is news that I'm retiring and you're like, but hello, what made you come to this decision? Well, full story will be on the very last episode of this podcast, where I'll get into a lot of details about why I've decided to retire. But the short version is basically that I took a 6-week sabbatical from doing anything with the podcast, doing anything marketing, anything like that. And short version is that I loved sabbatical so much and God was teaching me so much that I felt his leading into a different season. And I did feel like the Lord gave me a choice of like, okay, this new season could include the podcast or you could lay it down. And I will be deciding to lay it down just so I could spend more time with my family, so that I can enjoy my daughter while she's still a baby and not even think about the podcast. And I'm also going to be doing my master's degree and starting that in the new year. So I just wanted to lay this down to prep for all of that. And I feel a lot of peace with this decision. It's been going on for such a beautiful long time. The Lord has sustained it. And I feel like he's leading me in a different direction now. That's the short version. Okay. Short version is that it's time, but in one of these last episodes, I knew that I needed to make an episode for people who are afraid of having kids. Now, this may seem a little off the wall. I have never talked about kids in a previous podcast episode, at least not from my own mouth. I've had guests on that have like briefly mentioned parenting and things like that. Now, of course, I will not be offering parenting advice. That is not my place. I have a 5-month-old. I'm not going to be advising anyone to do anything with their babies or kids, okay? But I will tell you the story of how I was really deathly afraid of having kids for a few years, and how the Lord showed me that I should not be living in fear. And I know that a lot of you listeners may be in a similar boat, which is why I felt the need to share. I have received listener questions that say, is not having kids a sin? And we will be answering that on this episode. We will be talking about, is it right for you to have kids? I know having kids is not for everyone, and that's totally okay. Disclaimer, I am not making this to force anything on you. I am not making this episode to try to convince you to have kids. I'm not making this for that reason. I'm making this episode so that you will not miss out on what God is leading you into. So God is not leading every single listener listening to this episode into having kids one day. And I know that. And if the Lord is not leading you to have kids, that does not mean you're less than at all. It means he has a different plan for you, and you're going to disciple people in a different way, different people group, if you will. It's not your own kids. It could be in youth ministry, could be in children's ministry. It could be your neighbor's kids. It could be your nieces and nephews. It could be, people in your neighborhood, literally anyone. You are called to disciple who's in front of you, right? And some of you will have your own birth children in that group. Others will have adoptive children in that group. God is leading each of you to something specific, and I want to make sure that you are taking him up on everything that he's offering you. My desire with this episode is to tell you the story of how God set me free from fear of having children, and then encourage you to discuss with the Lord what he's leading you into. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. So, without further ado, let's ask my own question that I ask every guest. What have I been set free from? Well, I've been set free. Okay, so I have no idea if I will actually release the video of this, but it's just so funny how I'm like 5 episodes away from retiring from this podcast, and this is the very first episode I have ever decided to use video with it. And I don't even know if the video part will release. I'll definitely release the audio, but I'm trying video for the very first time. 5 episodes before the end. Okay, so I've been set free from the fear of having children. I have a 5-month-old. She's the most beautiful thing I've ever laid my eyes on. And let me tell you the story about why I was so afraid to even go down the road of potentially having children. This was not a lifelong fear for me. So I remember being very little. I always wanted to be a mom. I always wanted to have kids in the future. That was always something I pictured my life was, and it was kind of a deal breaker for me if I had dated anyone who was like, no, I definitely do not want children. That would have been a big deal breaker because I definitely wanted it. There are very few desires that I can pinpoint and say that is such an innate desire in how God designed me. Having kids was one of those desires that I just could not deny he had placed in me. And as I got older, I am going through elementary school. I played with baby dolls, Barbies, Polly Pockets, stuffed animals, my own dollhouse, played little house in the kitchenette set, all of it. I just so innately desired to have children someday. And as I got older, then I met Joseph. I thought, what a wonderful man. I think I'll marry him. So we got married. And it's one thing to want kids when you're single and you just know you want that. Then it's a whole nother thing that once you get married, you're like in a committed relationship, you're like, oh, the possibility of actually making this happen becomes very real. That you're like, oh, it could actually happen like pretty soon, or maybe, in a few years, or it just is a lot closer than you realize when you're single. But I will say this episode completely applies to those who are single, those who are dating, those who are married or engaged. Anyone can benefit from this because God so drastically changed my life and how I thought about children while, I wasn't pregnant. So the fear started to come over me, and it would just start with these little what ifs. Joseph and I are enjoying married life without kids, and we love our life. We love the Lord. We love each other. We knew that we wanted to have kids eventually. But, throughout the 2 years that we were married before children, this fear, this wave of fear started coming over me, and it didn't start huge. It just started with these little tiny what if questions that would enter my mind. All of these were negative what ifs. So these little seeds would just pop into my mind whenever I think about that. I'd think, what if I make a parenting mistake that just is unforgivable and really screws up our kids? I just don't know if I want to go through that. What if I'm going to read a lot of what ifs here. I have a whole list because any possible what if, a negative what if, you think it had entered my mind. I started thinking, what if we try and I find out that I'm infertile? That would be so devastating. What if we had a miscarriage? What if pregnancy was just awful? What if I lose my sense of self and I'm overwhelmed all the time when we have kids? What if we have kids, but I can't keep up with all my friendships because of them? What if I get postpartum depression? What if? You name a possible what if scenario to having kids that's negative, I thought it. And these what ifs just grew bigger and bigger and bigger through time. So it just became, through those 2 years, it became the fact anytime the possibility or talking about having kids would come up, I would actually sometimes get emotional and think all of this fear would just rush over me. And I did not have a positive what if. There was never such a thing of, what if we have kids and everything's fine and we love them so much and we have a great life? It was never a what if like that. It was never a positive what if. So I started getting emotional every time that the topic of kids would come up, because I'd just be like so overwhelmed in fear. And that was not always my story. So beginning of 2023, I started noticing a shift, not in me, but in things that I felt the Lord was telling me. So January 2023, at the beginning of every year, I usually ask the Lord for just some words for the year. I don't really do a one word type of thing for the year. I never really have been a one word person. I just ask for a list. Anything you want to tell me for this year, you let me know. Just give me a list. So January 2023, one of the things that I felt God speak to me for the year was olive trees. And I just thought, that was really random. Other things are like joy and transition and, whatever. But also one of the words that God gave me was olive trees. And I was like, what the heck? I don't really know what that is implying. Or am I going to see olive trees? Or should I pay attention to olive trees? It didn't make any sense. I just wrote it down, put it in a notebook, and set it aside, because I was like, I'm not going to try to figure out what that means. I don't know what that means. And then from there on out, through the entire first half of 2023, I felt like the Lord was trying to get my attention, speaking about children, speaking about possibly having children in the future, sooner rather than later. So I just felt like every month there was just a little like pinprick of, he was like, you don't need to be afraid. Like, what if kids are great? What if you have a great time? Positive what if started entering my mind, not from me, because I was still very much kind of resisting that prompting and those little words that the Lord was speaking. So February goes by, March goes by, I graduate with my bachelor's, and April comes. So in April, I finished up my job with prayer ministry. We did a little prayer ministry graduation for those who were in training and those who were learning how to do prayer ministry. So we did a little event. It was really fun to honor those who had gone through the program. So one thing we did for every person who had graduated, we just asked the Lord. We split this between two people. So one was me, one was Laura Krause, who was a guest on an episode. It's the first episode of season 4. How to live a life of love instead of fear. Ironic? I think so. So Laura took half the people, prayed for prophetic words for them. I took half the people, prayed for prophetic words for them. As people stood up, we called their name. We said, I feel like this is what the Lord is saying over you. I did all my people. Laura did all her people. One of her people was my husband, Joseph. Okay. So we say, thank you so much, Joseph, for completing the prayer ministry graduation. And then Laura goes over and prays for him. Right. And she says something. She's like, when I was praying for you, I felt the Lord tell me that it was a verse in Deuteronomy that says of his faithfulness through 1,000 generations. And just as the torch of the love of God has been passed down to you, so you are entrusted to pass it down to the next generation. And she also said, this will not be hard. It will not be hard to pass down the torch of the love of God to the next generation for you. It will actually be seamless, because it is not by your might, your strength. It's actually by the Lord's Spirit. Hello? What? So I'm his wife. I'm literally standing there next to him as she's telling this to Joseph. And I am trying not to weep. I'm trying just to hold it together. And then she prays for him and we, move on with the event. But as she told him that, I got a lot of peace. And it was actually kind of the first moment where I was like, what if passing on the torch of the love of God to the next generation includes us having kids? And what if it's actually really good? That's a possibility too. Whenever you take a risk, there's always, possibility things could go badly. It's a possibility things could go well. That's just life. But her giving Joseph that prophetic word actually probably spoke to me even more than it spoke to him, because it was the first moment where I thought, what if having kids goes really well? That's a possibility too. So that happened in April. The next month, May, me and a small group from this prayer ministry, we went overseas to teach a group of people overseas just how to do prayer ministry, how to start it there in their organization. And it was really, really fun. Now, on this trip, I did see olive trees. So in my mind, I thought, oh, that's really cool. Like, olive trees is a word that God spoke to me in the beginning of the year. And I didn't know I'd be on this trip in May. So I was like, that's really cool. Fulfillment of that word. So in this trip, one of our teaching times, I taught on how to experience the Lord through imaginative prayer. And I thought that through this event that we were doing that night, I thought that I'm here to serve these people. I'm here to teach them how to do this. They're going to experience God in a great way. And that was the end of my thoughts. I did not know, I did not know at the time that it was actually for me to experience God in a very powerful way. So here's what happened. I teach on heart as a home. So experiencing God through imaginative prayer and just asking him, if my heart were a home, what would it look like? And then having the Lord walk people through experiencing him if their heart were a home. So this is all in your imagination. The Lord will show you a picture if your heart were a home. So I teach on that. Then someone else comes up after me to lead the group through this imaginative prayer exercise. So I finish, he goes up, he says, okay, let's all pray. Let's try it out. So I participate in this and I ask the Lord, is there anything you want to show me? If my heart were a home, what would it look like? I had no idea that this whole thing was actually God ambushing me, if you will. Ambush. So here's what happened. When I start praying, I say, Lord, show me if my heart were home. This is the picture I got. I got a picture of me sitting in this room, and this room is really ugly. Like, I do not want to be in there. The walls are like black, and they have all these question marks on the wall. And I would call it the room of what if, because I feel stuck in my own what if thoughts. I feel stuck in my own what if thoughts. I don't want to be in there, but at the same time, I feel very safe in there, because if I'm just thinking what if all the time, I'm not making any decisions about anything. I'm not deciding anything. Nothing is set in stone. I'm just stuck in the imaginary what if room. And then I see Jesus come into the room and he says, Jenny, I'm not mad that you're in here. I'm not upset with you. I'm not disappointed. I know you've dealt with what ifs in the past, and I'm not upset that you're thinking what ifs about having kids. This is a completely new territory. So I just felt his overwhelming grace and mercy on me, that he wasn't upset with me, that I was doubting him, that I was doubting the dreams he's put in my heart. He wasn't mad at me. And he told me, when you're ready, I will help you walk out of here. You just let me know. It's just so beautiful. And so in this picture, I grab onto Jesus and I literally lean on him the whole time. And he walks us out of the room. And after I get out of the room, we turn around, see the door. He helps me take the deadbolt off the door. That he's like, you don't have to go back in there if you want to. You never have to go back in there. And we turned, and outside that room was all of the rest of the house. And the house was really beautiful. I was looking at a beautiful living room, beautiful kitchen, beautiful upstairs. And it's like just such a sigh of relief. And then it ended. And that was the whole picture I got. I was like, I thought I was here to just teach how to do this, to teach other people how to connect with God in their imagination. Hello? I didn't know I was going to be ambushed like this. Hello? So it was really meaningful. And I wrote it all down. I thought, okay, maybe we could have kids in the future and it would be a good thing. So as the year went on, you can just see that the Lord is like getting my attention more and more. Then that was in May. In June, we come back from the trip. Joseph and I have moved houses. We're just like adjusting to life in this new house. I am driving 30 minutes commute to work every day, and I enjoy it. It's really good. I just decide that commute is kind of my prayer or podcast listening time. And one day, beginning of June, I am just riding home, as I usually do, and I'm listening to a podcast. I could not tell you the title of this podcast or which episode it was, even if I tried. I just know it's by John and Lisa Bevere. That is one of their episodes that I was listening to. And I'm listening. I have no idea what episode it was, but they were not talking about having kids. Kids was not mentioned on this episode. That was not the topic. But in this episode, they mention repenting from fear. They mention repenting from living in fear. And it was just, I can't even give them the credit of like, wow, what a great episode that they produced and everything. It was just like the Lord just brought it to my attention immediately as I'm listening. And I start thinking, living in fear is wrong. And I know it's wrong. And if you were to ask me if I know that living in fear is wrong in every other area of my life, I would definitely say yes. It's actually sinful at times. And I know that I try not to live in fear in any area of my life, but I do actively and by my own choice live in fear about the decision to have kids. And I was totally convicted of this as I was driving home that day, listening to this episode. I just thought, who the heck have I been letting make my decisions? It was a big aha moment. And I get home and I am like, I don't even want to go in the house yet. I'm just not ready because I've just had a big aha. I have realized that I just let fear boss me around. Every what if that would enter my mind, I just automatically believe it. I would never, ever question the what ifs that would enter my mind about that topic. If you took any other area of my life and I was having all these what if doubts, I would definitely be actively fighting against them. I would know they're not from God, and I would pray against them. I would say, okay, how can I disprove these? I'm getting in my own head, and do everything in my power to get out of those. But I wasn't doing it in this area of my life. So I got home, parked the car. I just went on a prayer walk around the block because I did not want to go inside yet. And I just repented. I said, God, I'm so sorry that I have trusted you in every area of my life except this one area. That I have been letting fear be my master, and I've ultimately been letting fear be my God, because I have not surrendered family planning. I have not surrendered my fertility to you at all. I haven't let you had any say in it, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I'm terrified. Please help. That was basically my prayer. I just completely surrendered it to the Lord. And I was kind of just putting all these what ifs. I was putting a label on that list saying, these are good reasons to put it off. That's nothing harmful. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not hurting myself. I'll do it when I'm ready. Do it when I'm ready. Fact is, I was never going to be ready. I was never going to be ready because fear was my master. Okay, so that was at the beginning of June. End of June, I'm pregnant. Beginning of July, we find out I'm pregnant. So things took a turn, you could say. But I just want to clarify that when I surrendered and when I completely surrendered myself to the Lord and saying, family planning's yours and you can come into this area of my life. I'm so sorry I've let fear boss me around. When I said that, I did not mean, okay, by praying this, I am going to completely forfeit any preventative birth control. I was not saying, okay, I'm going to stop every method of birth control ever and just throw caution to the wind. That's not what I meant. That's not what we decided. I just prayed that and then just continued on with life. So beginning of July, we find out that I'm pregnant and it's good news. We're very excited. We are like, things just changed so fast. I was kind of nauseous. So I can't say that I was like, I'm living my best life. I've never been happier. I was very content that I was like, thank God the Lord has been doing this work in my life because here we are and this is happening. But also, I didn't really quite feel like myself, mostly because of the physical symptoms of very early pregnancy of, I feel nauseous and I am so tired all the time. So it was kind of a give and take. And then August, I'm just reading in my Bible one day and I literally accidentally find this verse. It's Psalm 128. It's only 6 verses, so I'll read the whole thing. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house, and your children will be like olive trees around your table. Yes, this will be a blessing for the man who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. Peace be on Israel. I just ran into that verse that your children will be like olive trees. And olive trees was a word the Lord gave me in January, and I was reading it in August and pregnant. It just blows my freaking mind every time I think about this, that the Lord was so faithful and so good to convict me of letting fear be my master. So I basically exchanged fear being my master for God being my good shepherd. Absolutely incredible. But I did not tell you all that just to let you hear a cool story and move on with your life. I really want you to consider this because this is not something that I take lightly anymore. I no longer take lightly what the Bible says about children because what I had believed before was really a tactic of the enemy. Where does fear come from? Fear comes from the enemy because fear always steals things from us. It always kills things off, kills your dreams, kills your ambition. It can kill anything. And it's seeking to destroy you. Making any decision out of fear never really leads to a life-giving place. So obviously my daughter's name is Avonlea. Avonlea means a return to childlike faith and simple beauty. And when we chose that name, I thought, wow, cool. Like that'll be her identity spoken over who she is. She'll be a woman of childlike faith. And it definitely is. I still believe that. But I realized, even as I reflect on this story, that it was actually me that returned to a childlike faith when I chose to stop letting fear be my master and be the master of my fertility, of our family. And I started deciding that the Lord was going to be my good shepherd instead. So my fear was really lying to me. And When I look back, I can see that all those what ifs were really rooted in the enemy, obviously, but it kind of ties into what this toxic feminism tells us as women living in this day and age. So, feminism, just that word, not with the cultural context tied around it. Feminism just means you want men and women to be equal and treated as equal. That's not a bad thing. Rock on. Rock on with your bad self. I mean, that's not a bad thing at all. In fact, irony, coincidence, I think not. My friend Avenle Ribeiro was the guest on the episode in season 4 entitled Is Jesus a Feminist? Now I've named my daughter Avenle and we're talking about feminism. You think that's a coincidence? That's pretty crazy to me. So, toxic feminism is what our culture in the United States has really shown women they need to be, of like, you're better than men, you have to fight for your position, you have to lie, cheat, and steal to prove yourself all the time. Toxic feminism also says a lot of things about women that are just untrue. Toxic feminism has a lot to say about having kids too. It'll say, that's not very convenient. Having kids is not convenient for you. Think about your future. Do you really want to dedicate your future to caring for someone else? Toxic feminism will say, having children is going to hinder your freedom. It'll say, that's going to stop your career. Everything that the world says about children is mostly negative. And it's quite the opposite of what God's word says about children. So if you, dear listener, are feeling those same things that I felt at one time, you're afraid that having kids is going to slow you down, I want to reveal this to you. This is actually a tactic of the enemy. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy the next generation. And guess what? You can see it in our culture. There are some obvious things. There's abortion. There's Plan B pills, which are abortion in a different form, right? He may not be able to convince you to have an abortion, but he may be able to convince you to not even entertain the possibility of producing life. Fear is what motivates a teenage girl to get an abortion, right? She's afraid it's going to disrupt her future, disrupt her career, disrupt what people think of her, her reputation. Fear, she just thinks it's going to ruin my life. But fear is the same thing that would motivate a Christian married couple to choose not to have kids. Now, before I get ahead of myself, you're probably thinking, whoa, wait. Fear isn't always the motivation for choosing not to have kids. This is not for people who are like, I do want to have kids, but it hasn't happened yet. I do want to have kids, but we've been trying and nothing's been happening. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the active decision, say, I'm afraid to have children, so let's just not. Sometimes it's not motivated by fear. Sometimes it is motivated by fear. Other times it isn't. The listener question I received was, is it a sin not to have kids? Bottom line is that no, it is not inherently a sin to choose to not have kids. But there are some sinful reasons to choose not to have kids, just as there are perfectly reasonable and justified reasons not to have kids. Ask the Lord what you are called to. The reasons you may think, well, I don't want to have kids because of this, or there's some of this too. There can be a lot of reasons, so they can appear very enmeshed in each other. You need to dissect them. So you may be asking, okay, well, how do I know if my reasoning for choosing to not have kids is sinful or not? Well, Romans 14 verse 23 says, whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. And that may give you a little wake-up call of like, hello? What am I choosing faith? What else am I not doing in faith? Is that sin? Okay, if your reasoning is not clinging to Christ and knowing with conviction that that is not what God is leading you into, then that could be sin. Whatever is not done in faith is sin. If you have decided on your own that you need to protect yourself, that you have a self-preserving mindset, and it's not something you have ever included the voice of God in this decision, then that is a sinful reason. If all of your reasons for choosing to not have kids are based on what if fear statements, then that is something you need to reevaluate. Here's the thing. I want to re-say this. I am not trying to convince you by saying this to have children. I am not saying that is the right answer for everyone. I am saying that if you are making that decision out of fear, then it is sinful. And why would it be sinful? I want you to ask yourself this. If you are having like panic attacks over the idea of having kids someday, if you are really worried about the potential outcomes of parenting, if you cannot sleep at night because you worry that you could be pregnant, you just got to take a test and you're just like, it just makes you so anxious. I want you to ask yourself, why would you have so much fear? Why would the enemy be trying so hard to scare you away from the potential of having children in the future? It's actually because having kids is an act of spiritual warfare. So think about this. There's this quote. You may have heard it. It's just a nice little saying. To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. What does that mean? Well, it means that when you plant seeds in the ground, you only do it because you're expecting fruit at the end of the day. You're expecting something that's beautiful to look at, that's going to nourish you. You're expecting something to grow from that seed. You don't just plant seeds for the fun of it. So to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. So if that's just a fun little quote that people say, to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow, how much more is having kids actually a choice to put your faith in God? Having a child is an act of faith, choosing to believe that God will do something in the future generation that's greater than what he's done in the past. It is choosing to believe that God's goodness that you've experienced is not something only for you, but it's something that will be experienced by the next generation too. It's to have hope for the future. In Jeremiah 29, there is that infamous, famous verse that we all put as our yearbook quotes or something like that, that God has plans to prosper you, not to harm you. There's a bunch of beautiful things that come before that one verse, but one of those things is the Israelites are in exile in Babylon, okay? Jeremiah is writing this. The Lord is saying to them, get comfortable and root yourself here. He's not saying shield yourself from everything that this new culture offers you, even though the Babylonian culture was evil. Even though they were pagans, they did not worship the one true God. Even though they did a lot of sinful, wrong things, the Israelites were God's chosen people living in this ridiculous culture, anti-God culture. And yet God tells the Israelites to settle down. He says, I will get you out of here. You won't be in exile forever. He says, settle down, root yourself here, build houses, plant gardens, have children. And then when your children are old enough, make sure they get married and have children. Isn't that so crazy? That God wasn't like, no, just the world is too evil. The world is too evil. Don't bring more people into this world. He's saying, I have something for the future that your kids will see. So God always challenges us to think outside of ourselves. That because when we only think of ourselves, we are so selfish. We are self-filled, and we are not called to be self-filled. We're called to be spirit-filled. So that is so interesting and very parallel to all our culture now. He's saying like, the world is just so evil. It's so evil. There's so many bad things that happen. We're in the middle of an election season that everyone's nervous for. And I'm so nervous. It's the potential of having kids. What am I bringing them into? God is actually bigger than anything this culture could do to you or to your children. So having children is an act of faith. You're saying, God is not only good to me, but I actually trust him to be good to the next generation too. It's an act of spiritual warfare. Think about this. My fear was always, what if? But there comes a time when you just have to count the cost. Love is vulnerable because it is so beautiful. So let's say you're married and you're just on the fence. let's talk about when you started showing interest in your now spouse. It was a huge risk, okay? You could have gotten rejected. Your spouse did not have to marry you, but you decided to put yourself out there in some way. They decided to risk rejection, risk heartbreak by showing interest and getting into a relationship with you. There was no guarantee that you were going to have this beautiful marriage on the other side of that. Love is vulnerable. And by choosing to have kids, you are paying a price. Let's say, I just don't know if I can afford it. I don't know if we can afford it. Think of the money. I just worry about money anyway. No, no, no. Listen, by choosing not to have kids, you are also paying a price. By choosing to have kids, you're paying the price of diapers. You're paying the price of time, emotional, and mental energy. Sure. But anything that is actually worth it will cost you something like that. By choosing not to have kids, you are also paying a price. And we don't think about that part as much. So one of my favorite books, The Defining Decade, is written by Dr. Meg J. She mostly counsels people who are in their 20s going into their 30s. And there's a whole chapter in that book about fertility. Why is there a whole chapter in there? Because people can fall into the trap of thinking that they can just keep putting off this decision. They can say, oh, I'm just not ready yet, but I'll be ready by the time I'm 35, for sure. I'm definitely going to decide if I want kids when I'm, arbitrary age, 31. But by putting off the decision, then by the time they actually decide to have kids, sometimes they unfortunately realize it is too late, that they unintentionally already made the decision not to have them. So there's always a price to pay on either side. You just have to count the cost of which one is worth it to you. So there is a cost, but you need to count the cost and decide which is worth it. So I just threw a lot out there. I want you to take all these things into consideration. And basically, your action point for after this episode, you're going to stop listening to my voice and then you're going to be stuck with your own thoughts, okay? Listen to God's voice in this decision. Even if you are single and you're not dating anyone and marriage is maybe you think far away. If you are on the fence, go ahead and just invite God into that decision for you, because you may realize there's a lot more to the decision than you thought there was. Some resources that I really like about this and that really helped me was there's a podcast episode called A Prophetic Warning for This Generation. It's by Lisa Bevere. It's on the Fight for Female podcast. And of course, the book, The Defining Decade by Dr. Meg J. She helps 20-somethings make decisions that are going to impact the rest of their life. Very trustworthy source. Most of all, what I want you to do is just invite God into the conversation. Because having a child is definitely the best thing I've ever done with my life. And sometimes I look at her and I just think, I can't believe I was willing to let fear be the boss of me and possibly prevent her from being born. If you are living in fear, that is not where God wants you to be. I basically had to decide, who am I going to fear? Am I going to live in fear of having kids and let the enemy boss me around in making this decision? Or am I going to have the fear of the Lord and say, whatever God wants, that's what I want too? What if I made this decision out of love instead of fear? There is so much here, so much I could dive into. And I hope that I've left you, dear listener, with a lot to pray about, a lot to think about. So with that, we are tying up this episode. Listen, I need you to know that I am rooting for you. I am rooting for you. I want the best for you. That's why I make this podcast. I don't just do it to hear the sound of my own voice. I could do a lot of other things besides make a podcast if I just enjoyed the sound of my own voice. I want you to make the most empowered decision and invite God into it. I do not want you to miss on anything He has for you. I would be so honored, dear listener, if you would take the time to write a review and leave a 5-star rating on this podcast episode. because what that does is it offers it and suggests it to other people. I know that, Head to Heart is going to stay up on every podcast platform it's still available on, even after I'm finished making it. So these episodes will still be suggested to people even once it's finished. If you leave a 5-star rating and review, that means that it's going to get into the hands of someone else who really needs it and who needs shame, fear, and lies taken off of them by the love of Christ. So dear listener, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this whole episode. I am praying for you. I'm rooting for you. I know that you will make the right decision because the Lord is on your side, helping direct you and guide you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this journey.